You train for the threats you can see, but what about the ones you can't? United Diagnostic Services brings hospital grade diagnostic technology directly to first responder agencies, making early detection of cardiovascular disease and cancer more accessible than ever. UDS provides comprehensive early detection programs using advanced ultrasound, CT calcium scoring, stress echoes, and innovative blood panels to identify potential health risks long before symptoms appear. It's proactive, on site, and built specifically for those who serve. Early detection saves lives and careers. Learn more at udshealth.com. Light Touch is a non-medical wellness device designed to support calm, regulation, and more restful sleep in the midst of everyday stress. For first responders and other high-stress professionals, it offers a simple way to support steadier functioning, recovery, and overall well-being. To learn more, check out episode 317 or visit mylighttouch.com. The views and opinions expressed by the host and guests of this show do not represent their employing agency, department, or organization. All information should be regarded as anecdotal, contextual, and educational, and should not be misinterpreted as legal or medical advice. Welcome to Blue Grit Radio, the podcast that explores making better cops for a better community. I'm your host, Eric Tung. I've been an active police officer since 2007. We will dive into the aspects of police culture, health and wellness, leadership, and mindset. You'll hear from experts not only from policing, but all industries as they relate to being our best with purpose, passion, and positivity. Join me as we share stories, lessons, and advice so we can all be better for ourselves, our teams, our families, and our communities. Hey everyone, welcome back. I'm super stoked about this episode because I don't have a strong script, but I have several things that I know we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about K9, the ups and downs of working that type of a role, and the intricacies of a partner, and going through hardship there, some connection with my guest there in that respect, but also gratitude. One thing that really stuck out to me about our guest today is his energy of moving forward. You know, you can see it clearly in the stuff he puts out. You can hear it if you've heard other interviews with him, and you're going to certainly hear it today. And so without further, I'm welcoming Chris Bingham. Chris, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Eric. It's always I always say it's always an honor to come on and share this story with anyone that's willing to listen. So thank you for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely, man. We got a shout. I suppose we didn't get a shout. I received a shout about you from Dom when you popped onto his podcast, and that was quite a while ago that we got connected. Where he's like, "Hey, this is a solid dude, and I think you'd really connect with him." So that I don't know how to say it. Maybe that credibility of somebody that has been in the trenches, has worked this type of challenging work, but also has a really positive outlook. I mean, you're a veteran law enforcement police officer, working for a federal agency. You've been in the game for a while, and you're very positive. And I think that that's worth highlighting. That's worth us kind of showcasing and talking about when we and the content I put out is largely targeting the younger generation. Like, how do you navigate this as best you can?
Yeah, and the big thing is life is a journey, and there's a lot of ebbs and flows, and it's just kind of ride. What I've learned, it's kind of riding that wave and keep pushing forward. And if I can share some of that wisdom with others and stuff that's helped me get through things, it's always a welcome opportunity to do so.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that, man. And I love to be able to highlight your modeling, your example. When you look back through your life and you're, we'll say middle aged. Yeah. Is that fair?
Yeah, yeah, that's fair.
I hit 40 this year, and I've been calling it middle aged, and a lot of sources do. But those that are close to aged with me oftentimes are like, dude, that's not middle aged, because we don't want to identify as middle aged. But let's be real, like,
Right.
a lot of people live to 80. And so, like, that's not to paralyze us. That's to, empower us. And you've been in the game longer than me. When you look back through your life, do you think and do you feel that you've always had this ability to flip hardship into a growth opportunity, or is that something that came later?
I think it started from the get-go. I've talked about before my relationship with my father. He left when I was young, and I always say that I lost my first best friend before he was able to become one for me, and that takes a toll on somebody, and you kind of grow up with this armor, right? And it's like never feeling good enough and putting this armor up to kind of protect yourself. And, I've always kind of had that. I guess, you develop this chip on your shoulder that, am I good enough? And then constantly always trying to prove things and prove things to yourself and chasing validation. So I think I kind of grew up from the get-go facing adversity, and in some ways I've tried to turn that into a positive of knowing what it's like to kind of be at the bottom and work your way out of that. So I think that's kind of started at an early age for me, to be honest.
Yeah. Yeah, it's often called the father wound, right? And it's like all too prevalent in the United States. And I think it's a lot of why we have the jobs we do and we need the amount of cops we do, unfortunately. And not to go down that rabbit hole, but yeah, that's something else that, I didn't know about you. Um, but that's a carryover, right? My dad didn't leave our family, but he was really vacant, and he's not someone that I really felt like I had much for a relationship, even living in the same house. We lived very different lives as far as like my sister, my mom, and me, and then him. And then it became quite disruptive. I'll say it that way. But I think that for me, it's just recognizing a lot of what you said, but it took me a lot longer to be able to recognize that. And I certainly would not have been able to put the type of vocabulary to it that you did, right? Which is the chasing validation. Being good enough was certainly a thing. And for me, that was like, how do I learn how to be a man? Like how do I, whatever that means. And there's a lot of discussions these days about what that means, but I think and I hope and I believe, and I truly feel like it's the types of things that you share and put out and that we try to talk about here on the show, which is to be kind, which is to be purposeful, which is to focus on your family, be a protector of others that can't protect themselves, which is what the job is.
Yeah, and I'm a firm believer of paying it forward, and although my father wasn't in my life, I had a lot of good mentors, and one of them was the guy who picked me for my first K-9 position.
Mm.
I was in my early 20s, and a lot of people said I wasn't cut out for K-9, and he was a guy that kind of took a chance on me out, as a kid in my young 20s. And brought me on, and he kind of let me make mistakes and learn from them. And he was very blunt and upfront, but he always said, honesty saves people's careers. And not only over time did he become a friend, he became kind of a father figure that father figure that I didn't have. And he helped me in so many ways and in my personal life. And then the full circle moment is after I had retired two dogs and left for a little bit and took some other leadership positions. He had moved up to our deputy chief and then brought me back as the commander. He was the one that hired me, so it was such an honor to go into that role that he held. But the crazy part was, about 2 weeks after he selected me for that position, he died of a massive heart attack, and that really gutted me.
Mm.
It was just one of those things. It was like such an honor to step in that position, and then to go right from that to him, kind of leaving my life, and which really kind of left a big void, which was tough.
Yeah. Man, and I appreciate you sharing about him and his example because that's kind of where I want to go is like no one does it alone. No one's quote unquote self made. There are no self made men. And I can really appreciate so much of like the sacrifices my mom made. And at the same time, not to take anything away from her, but I needed and I required and I require still like mentorship from other individuals, right? And other men, especially growing up. Like I needed to see positive examples of what a man was like, somebody that was, very comforting to their kids, someone that was very patient with me, spending time at my friends' houses, with their dads and their parents and family structures. I had to see that it was possible, so I could dream up and kind of carve out like my intention, which was to have a warm, inviting, warm, I guess like a joyful home where yelling wasn't happening every day. Like you have to see it. You have to see it to be able to manage it, imagine it. And I really appreciate how you said several things, about your mentor, and that was, that he took a chance on you and that he let you learn and grow, through your stumbles, and it was always there. And man, like as we were talking before the recording, I almost felt like saying, and then the audio like cut out, so we had to restart. But I almost felt like saying that I feel like you're living a very poetic life, and I mean that in the most complimentary way.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting how everything's kinda come together and how so many things have run, parallel in my life with, with my dogs and with my mentor, with my dad, with my son, and, I've really reflected a lot on that over the last, several months of how that's all, come together, and I try to, again, taking chance on people. I've tried to, pay that forward now. I still talk to, my mentor's family, his wife, and his kids, and tell them, I'm still keeping his legacy alive, and I try to, instill that same knowledge on this new generation of letting them make mistakes, letting them learn from that, and letting them grow, and letting them know that when you have to be direct with someone or give them constructive criticism, that it's not personal, that you're trying to help them. And when you do that, people will start to follow you and respect you. Because I always tell people that, I want them to follow me not for the title, but for the man that I am. And, I try to, build those connections and show some vulnerability to people. And I think that's important to kind of for people to see that.
Yeah. Yeah, I 100% agree. And what was your mentor's name?
Bernie.
Bernie. I feel like Bernie, I'm getting like these Obi-Wan vibes because it's like he left you so suddenly, but he set you on the course that you need to be on. And then in a way, you didn't need him anymore. Like you miss him, you honor him, you remember him, but you didn't, you're still like carrying forth and paying it forward now.
And it's crazy because our last conversation, I saw him at work that day, and his last thing he said to me is like, you know, "You need to find your own niche. Don't try to be me. Don't try to be anyone else. You need to be Chris Bingham. Find your own niche. Be your own person, and people will follow you." And it was almost like I don't know, like he was speaking to me like he wasn't going to be there, much longer. And then
Mm.
I got the call 11 o'clock at night that he had passed, and it was just kind of surreal. But I feel like he always had this, this prophet mindset, like he knew things that other people didn't. And you're right. I think you hit the nail on the head, almost like that, Obi-Wan, the knowledge and he saw something in me when other people didn't. And when people do that, it instills confidence and and you don't want to let them down when somebody believes in you, right? And I try to do that now with others and the same knowledge. But he was one of a kind.
Yeah, it sounds like that. And he's helped you to set course on you being one of a kind, right? Like I hear this, even that feedback and that advice he gave you is like the last thing to be you, right? Like don't be me, don't be anyone else. Like it's a fool's errand. And I feel that more and more. I share that oftentimes where as a new sergeant, a lot of my missteps and mistakes were trying to emulate others. And yes, we need to learn from others, but it becomes kind of like a reference point. You got to get from all these teachers and mentors and coaches to build your own style, right? You take all these things, you integrate them into you, but like everything we need is within ourselves. We just need to kind of unlock those doors and kind of support those potentials. And I feel like what Bernie was sharing is now becoming a little bit more popular in leadership cultures, in leadership books and philosophy. But at the time, man, you're talking about like in your early 20s when you started working with him, and then through your
Mhm.
career, you've been in the game, what, like 25 ish years?
Yeah, going on almost 25 years now.
Yeah, and so I feel like he was really ahead of his time because still we have in policing especially a really, this command and control type traditional leadership, which is not really be vulnerable, which is not share your mistakes. It's very protective of our own personal egos. And so like, extra shout out to Bernie there.
Yeah, and one of the things I've always tried to do is build for that future, right? I want the people that work under me to be better than me, and I've never feared, somebody being under me being better at something, and that's what I want, and that's how I know I'm doing a good job. Is when, I know the people behind me are going to come in and do a better job. But often I think in leadership, people get worried about that. They let their ego get in the way, and they try to hold people back. But that's something to be proud of when you can get people to be better than you were, in that position. And one of the things he always said to me is he said, Chris, if you focus on the success of others, whether you want to or not, you want it to or not, your own success is always going to take care of itself. And that's true. And that's what I've tried to do
Mhm.
my whole career is focus on others. I just graduated from the Northwestern last year through their 12-week school, and one of the big things they talked about in there was servitude leadership. And I think that's a big aspect of leadership is, yes, as leaders, we have people that work for us, but we also work for them. And it's making sure that they have everything that they
Yep.
need from mentoring to, knowledge and training and all that kind of stuff. So I put a big emphasis now on servitude to the people that work for me as well.
Yeah. I love that. I've gotten that feedback before, which is a couple. It was kind of two pronged. One was like you care too much about what your people think, and
Hmm.
then two is like you care about whether they feel like you care. And I was like,
Yeah.
I mean, we're talking about a team, right? Like, and this is not like, like, I'm sure a lot of people might call this type of style, soft or, whatever, touchy feely, but it's like, dude, like what organization functions better when people feel like your leadership and your management don't care, right? Like what
Yeah.
sports team, what corporation, what military unit? Like I've never heard of it, right? And you hear all these really iconic stories, especially when stuff hits the fan. The company's about to go bankrupt, or you're in this actual wartime battle, or you're in the stuff and there's gunfire, and policing, and then you talk about and you hear about these stories of like these line leaders. Sometimes they're officer level, sometimes they're sergeant, whatever, but their values and their commitment stood out to make the people first, right, to accomplish the mission, and they're like they go hand in hand. And so it's like I still hear this notion, and I'm like, I don't understand how we're at this disconnect. But we just got to do our thing and not get drugged down by those sentiments. We just got to keep charging forward with what we know to be true and what we believe in.
Yeah, and I try to build relationships with each of my officers. I have a couple hundred officers that are under me, and one of the things that I'm in the process of doing is meeting with each one of them individually, just to get to know me a little bit. I tell them about my background, my upbringing. I'm vulnerable a little bit, and then I ask them about themselves, their family. So when we do pass each other, it's not just "Hey, sir, hello," and I want them to feel a connection with me. So that's important to me to do that. And also when you do that, when people are going through struggles in life, they're going to be more apt to come to you and say, "Hey, Chris, if I'm off, I'm going through a divorce, or I just lost my parent." And I've had success with that in the past as I built a relationship with my subordinates, and when they're off or when something's bothering them, and they feel comfortable coming to you, being able to talk about those things. And that's so important now, especially with wellness and making sure, we're taking care of the people that work for us, but, making them feel comfortable being able to come to us as leaders and showing them that we do really care.
Yep. And I was thinking exactly what you said, which is like that's how you actually prove this culture of wellness, right? Because we can have a wellness policy, we can say we hired all these clinicians or therapists or physical therapists and embedded performance coaches, whatever. But like really, if people aren't even comfortable saying that they need something from you, whether it's a piece of equipment or whether it's time off uh, to grieve, for their family member, then you don't have the safety. And we talk about safety, 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 right? Officer safety and operations, but they're like really one and the same when we talk about trying to do the job and like critical trust, which I think anyone would agree that you really got to trust your buddy, trust your team in this work.
Oh, 100%. And you want them to ask questions or be comfortable coming to you saying, "Hey, I need more training in this," or "I'm not comfortable in this situation." Because I've seen it often in K-9 where, the young handlers come on and they're struggling, but they're afraid to say something because they're afraid they're gonna think, "Oh, they're not up to par, they're not a good enough handler." But when you create that atmosphere and that connection and that rapport, they're gonna come to you and know that, hey, I'm not going to get thrown off the team if I come to them, if I have some questions or some struggles. And, because everybody kind of goes through that in every aspect, and it's having that comfort level to be able to have those discussions and being able to have that support from your leadership. It's so critical.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. We keep kind of hovering around K9, and that is something I want to get into more. And I know it's just such a popular career goal, but also topic, for people that don't know a lot about it. And so, yeah, it sounds like you had that interest in working a dog pretty early in your career.
Yeah, it's funny because again, I grew up with, again, I talked about that armor I grew up with, and I didn't always let people in right away. I had some mistrust, and it took a while for me to let people in and trust them. So it's funny, I would go to the family functions, and I'd always, seek out the dog, and I'd be hanging out with the dog most of the time. And I always had a my mom always said I had a gift with animals, and said that, I should find a career doing something with them. So, you know, I kind of went from job to job for a little bit. I know my mom was kind of worried about me of where I was going to end up. And, I had taken some classes at the community college, and, took a criminal justice class and really got interested in the law enforcement aspect. And, I started with a local department, and I watched their K-9 unit from afar, and I just, kind of fell in love with the bond that these handlers had with the dog, and I knew that, that was something that I eventually wanted to do. And, and that opportunity presented itself when I got into my current agency. So it was kind of, a full-fledged from there with K-9.
Yeah, you have all these full circle moments. I'm getting like I love it, and I'm getting more and more fascinated by it, right? Like everything from family, and we'll get to like your thoughts and reflections on family now as you're a newer dad, right? And like kind of you breaking the cycle. Some things are full circle and some things are kind of breaking or rechanging the cycle, which I feel very much that way with my family, my daughter, and I'm very happy, grateful, and proud about that. But even with Canine, like I know, and I did hear that anecdote from a different interview where I heard you on, and you're talking about like really gravitating towards your like the other dogs and at family functions and gatherings. And when you said that, I was really taken back to going to my friends' houses because I wasn't allowed to have a dog growing up, but I would like I would deviate, right? And I'd be like playing with the dog in the mudroom, and like wrestling around with their dogs and playing fetch. And like I remember a couple buddies different times would be like, Eric, let's go upstairs. We got to play, right? Like video games or whatever. I'm like, dude, your dog's so cool. And one of my earlier jobs I did a shadow for, like in a middle school, was as a veterinarian, right? But it wasn't for me. When I got interested in policing and I started, I thought it would be investigations just because I was a pretty analytical guy. And that's what my early supervisors said I should think about. But getting in the foot chases and all that, that's where I was like, no, I gotta figure out more about this canine thing, and it eventually became working a patrol dog.
Nice. And it's funny. One of the other things about the dogs early on, and the family functions, and then having them when I was young, there was always this comfort level, right? And that's carried on to all three of the dogs that I've worked and retired. Is that when you're struggling, you're going through something, there's something about the comfort, that they bring. I guess, part of it is the no judgment, the loyalty, and, just the comfort of them, their presence being around. And, that's always gotten me through the hard times. And, I talk about it a lot in the other interviews, is that, these dogs have kind of been my security blanket as I've gone through these hard things in life. And, they never leave you, and it's like no words need to be spoken, but it's just that, that presence there that, kind of gets you through things, and it's kind of like you're in it together, and, they're not going to leave your side. So it's really been everything for me in getting through these hard times in life.
Yeah. There's such a paradox. I'm curious your thoughts on this because regardless, and I know you worked, detection dogs, um, with dog work, I feel like there's just such this archetype of a handler. It's a highly competitive thing. You have to be self-motivated. You got to train a lot, and then you got to be on it to make sure you're dialed in for these calls. For you, how did you manage that? And do you have thoughts on that? Working several dogs and working amongst different handlers and units, like where people can have that What am I looking for? I'm almost looking for that allowance to make mistakes because for me, my perception of when a dog's called out, like all eyes are on, you're like, it's up to you to make or break this case.
Yeah, and I had to learn early on. My first dog was a dual purpose dog, and back then,
Mm,
when Bernie brought me on, they gave me this. I was living at home with my mom, and they gave me this Malinois, and they're like, here's your dog, and I'm taking this dog home, and it was like taking this Ferrari home, and trying to figure things out. And when I look back on it now, being 24 years old and knowing the amount of work that needs to go on, especially working a patrol dog with the obedience and staying consistent with the training and everything. But one of the things I've really learned over time is to really, trust your dog in any situation that you're working them. And I've tried to do that on all calls, especially when you got all eyes on you. You're going on a bomb sweep, or you're getting called out for big events. And we've done a couple inaugurations, and recently, a couple years ago, I was a judge for at the World and Police Fire Games for the K-9 events, and I ran the vehicles for everybody for detection. And it was funny because you could tell the handlers were changing the way they worked because they were in a competition, and the dogs were just not, they were missing things, they were false sitting. And you talk to them afterwards, and I asked them, is that how you normally would work your dog? And they're like, no, I just got nervous, and I didn't want to miss anything. And the big things I always tell people, going back to it, is trust your dog. Don't change how you're doing things. But when you do have all those eyes on you, it's a mentality, and you just have to go into it. And it's it to me, you can have 100 eyes on you, but it's me and the dog in that situation, and I'm trusting him, and then it's my job to step in when he needs me to. You know what I mean? So I've been successful with all three of my dogs. They've all been vastly different. My first dog, Rex, was a dual purpose Malinois. Then I had an all black Shepherd. Tina was my second dog, and then I, of course, had Tambo, which was another German Shepherd. And they've all been different. But it's getting that to know them, how they work, their little ticks, and building that unspoken bond. And the big thing for me is trusting them, and I would know when I needed to step in, and go with them when they would show a change of behavior. And but I think that's the biggest thing is people just they tend to not trust the dog sometimes, especially when you look at working explosive detection dogs. There's not a lot of margin for error there, you know what I mean? So we see it like when we would put stuff out for some of the handlers and they were unknowns, and you see them, their dogs show an interest, and all of a sudden they're looking around like, oh crap, they don't, because they don't want to be wrong, right? Because if you're wrong, you're calling it, you're calling in EOD, and then that's a whole nother situation. So um yeah, but it's been a whole process for me, and learning and from all three of these dogs.
yeah, that's a lot. That is a common. I'm curious if you hear this. I imagine something similar, if not the same. But one, a saying out here is, your emotions travel down the lead, right? So your dog senses when you're off. Yeah. And then the other thing that was said from the beginning, and it still said, is like you have to trust your dog, or your dog's always right. Um, I think I took that too literally at times because sometimes I was like, no, he was off. But I think if you zoom out and you look at that, you're like, okay, trust your dog or what he's telling you. And if you are dialed in as a team, your dog is telling you other things. Like, he's not just on the suspect trail. There might be enough nuance where if I was dialed in and my partner, Kato, if we were dialed in, and then I would know that he was actually on animal scent, right? Like there's something different if you're paying attention. So it's not like, we're not literally having a conversation, but the relationship eventually gets there or hopefully gets there. But I think that, man, like what you said kicks up this theme for me, which is that you have to believe, and you have to believe it's possible for those that struggle through, especially the transition, like the early stage of a dog and bonding. And like I've heard stories where the dog's fighting the handler, and then they're asserting, the handler has to like assert dominance and prove that. But then also the dog's messing around and the dog doesn't want to work. And like how you build that trust. Sometimes if a handler's like, man, I don't think it's gonna work. Well, then it probably won't, right? But if you're like, man, this is gonna be a trek, and I'm gonna work with my boss and other trainers, and I can see the growth, and I can see that we're making baby steps. Like I've seen teams totally turn it around, my own included, right? To get those reps and build that trust over time.
Yeah, and that's how it was with my first dog, and, having Bernie, as that mentor, and thankfully letting me make mistakes. And you hit a great point, Eric, talking about, how emotions travel down the end of the lead. As early on, I was going through a bad breakup, and we were doing our yearly certifications, and I just went in and I completely bombed it because my head wasn't in it. But my dog, we were so bonded, he felt everything down the end of the lead, and he's like, "Man, dad's acting different." So then it caused him to act different. And, one of the things Bernie always said to me is like, "Look, when you come to work, especially in this game, you gotta have an imaginary trash can that you throw your problems in before you come to work, and you gotta be focused, and, you can't be, dragging that stuff in because the dog is gonna feel it, right? And it only takes, one time
Mhm.
for a dog to pick up a bad habit, and it's a lot harder to break those habits sometimes. So, you gotta, especially working a dog, you gotta have it because you're so in tune with this dog, and they're feeling everything. And that's what I saw at the World of Police Fire Games. The handlers started acting differently, so then the dogs did, and they couldn't understand that until I actually, broke it down afterwards. But you see that all the time, and consistency is everything. My first two dogs, the bond kind of came easy. With Tambo, that was a whole process, but I had to be consistent. And over time, with consistency, he started to trust me. I trusted him, and that's how you become a good team. You got to be consistent, and you got to be able to trust each other, and ultimately, just like you said, trust the dog and keep the emotions out of it when you're working them.
Yeah. Yeah, man, I pulled this quote, before we got going, and I thought about opening it with it, but I think this is a good time. He is your friend, your partner, your defender, your dog. You are his life, his love, his leader. Unknown. Unknown who said that or wrote that. But yeah, man, when I think about K9 and I came to learn more about you and Tambo, K9 Tambo, as far as your online presence and social media, and then now children's book, and we'll get into that. But learning about, Tambo and your story there, like, there's a lot of really close connection, and I'll get into it without going out of order, and I'll share that with you because I'm not sure if you know. Um, but yeah, can you tell us more about Tambo? You gave us a sneak peek, kinda like working another dog. But yeah, tell us more about Tambo and some of the adversity and insights, like life lessons that you've gotten to learn through him.
Yeah, so I kinda set the stage a little bit with, my upbringing, and then, Bernie taking a chance on me, and then, bringing me back as the commander, and then him passing away. And we'll start there. After he passed away, I was kind of spiraling a little bit. But one of the things they did tell me when I came back as the commander, because I had retired, two previous dogs, and they both passed away within a year of each other after they retired from cancer. But when I came back as the commander, they told me I was going to be too busy, that, I gotta, with the administrative stuff, that they're not going to give me a dog. And that was kind of tough to take at first, but I kind of went with the flow. And then, with Bernie passing, I started spiraling a little bit with depression. And I realized, Eric, like, the one thing that had gotten me through those hard times in life, as I talked about earlier, was having that dog, right? And I'm a type that wanted to lead from the front. So I went back and forth with my boss, who I came up with in K9, about taking another dog, and it kind of became a running joke for about a year, until finally one day, I brought it up again randomly in a meeting, and she's like, "Fine, if you want a dog, you got to take Tambo." And, the deal on him is, he was on our unit. He went through, two handlers. He couldn't really bond. He was one of those dogs, and I'm sure you've seen him before. They're just kind of aloof, that no one really
Mhm.
wants to work him, because when these handlers come on, they want that instant bond. He wasn't aggressive in any way. He was just aloof and didn't want to bond with anybody, and nobody really wanted him. So after the second handler kind of gave up on him and left, he was just sitting in our kennel unassigned. And it's funny. I had watched other people work him and seeing him dragging him around, and I said to my lieutenant, I was like, "Man," I said, "I'm glad I don't have that dog." And So now comes kind of the full circle moment where I get to take it or leave it with Tambo. And I was a little hesitant at first, and then I just said I'll take him. And I remember, and I talk about this in all the interviews, is that Monday, I'm going to get him out of the kennel, and we're just kind of staring at each other for like 20 seconds and looking each other down, and but I saw something familiar. I saw a dog that people had given up on. I saw a dog that had been labeled guarded, aloof, stubborn, and I was like, "Man, this is me. This is everything that I've been labeled in my whole life, right?" And then I thought about Bernie, the one guy that took a chance on me, right? And I said to myself, man, he just needs somebody to take a chance on him. He needs somebody to be consistent. And I knew that, the bond wasn't going to be overnight, just like it is with me, right? For people to get into my inner circle, it's breaking down that wall, gaining that trust and respect. And to me, I knew what the recipe was with him, and I knew it was going to be a process. So, I didn't take him home right away. We went on walks, but one of the things I tried to do, Eric, was just be consistent, is go up every day, feed him his breakfast at the same time, take him out. And at first he'd walk and, he'd kind of give me the side eye. I knew he was curious about me. And then over time, we kind of built that consistency. And, I let him work, and he's the type of dog that, you want to have an independent dog, but then also when you need to step in, you want that dog to be able to listen to you. So it took a while to build up that trust with the detection work, but once we got there, man, we were rocking and rolling, and he came home. He finally had a home, and he settled in, pretty quickly. And I'm a firm believer also when it's time for work, it's time for work. But when these dogs come home, I just let them be a dog, and that's the whole part of the bonding process for me, and why I've been able to bond so closely with these dogs. But it was a whole process, and the parallels were just kind of unreal, of him and I kind of coming together, and I really feel like it was meant to be, and we had a long, fruitful 7-year career together.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for sharing the beginning part of that because man, and like you're kicking up memory lane for me because even some things I didn't know, like when you describe his aloofness, um yeah, my dog would be that way. And actually, when we were surveying dogs, that's one of the things. When I say aloof in this respect, like meeting different dogs, like he didn't seem to take to me, but I actually loved how he was interacting with his handler and his breeder, and I was like, well, he doesn't seem to give a crap about me, which is really hard. Like you want the dog to like you, right? You want to just have this like love at first sight, like you're frolicking together after that. But because I saw how focused he was on the handler, the breeder, I was like, well, that is the future me. Like we can get there, we will get there. His original name was Bear, actually, from the breeder because he had these big old paws. He was sable shepherd. So for people that don't know, that's like the ones that are like black, brown, like gray, all intermixed in their fur. And yeah, this big old round head. So I renamed him to Kato based on the Green Hornet, like Bruce Lee's character from the old show. Because that's like how I look at it. I'm like, man, the handler's just drive like ironically, that's the one that's driving, whereas Kato was the driver. But like Bruce Lee's character was doing all the work. Like he was the one doing all the martial arts and taking care of bad guys. Whereas like the Green Hornet was not quite as cool in my opinion. So that was trying to kind of nod to Bruce Lee as a huge Bruce Lee fan. Um, but yeah, man, it's interesting when you say, well, one another this kicked in my mind. You're talking about Bernie, but like, man, these are like really advanced therapy techniques, like to visualize a trash can or a box, like put the emotions and the angst in there. Like, don't like throw it in the ocean, but like you might have to revisit that box later, but we have to compartmentalize in this job. And that's gotten such a bad rap, compartmentalization. I think sweeping things under the rug, acting like they don't exist, that's not helpful. But yeah, if you go into work, you got to be in work mode. Like you can't be thinking about that, argument about money with your significant other. It's going to be distracting. But when you come back home, that's when you can, readdress that and like iron that thing out. Um, so yeah, a little tidbit wellness from my perspective back then. But yeah, man, like just like building that bond. I'm curious because you share really that trust aspect and also working with your dog, but also like allowing him to be a bit of a dog. I'm curious if you have anything you would have done different, and maybe not so much because you worked a few dogs, but for me, one of the things that really held us back, and in hindsight, it was a lot of advice I got, which is like, this is a work dog. He is not a pet, all these things. So I actually put, and this is more clear through my career, but I put a lot of emotional like guardrails on myself because I actually called him the work dog because I had all this fear baked in, right? I had this fear that at any moment he can be taken away because I messed up at work. So that was, that's a fear point that restrains you. Another thing, I'm like, man, he's going into harm's way pretty early in our career. He got stabbed, and so I'm like, at any moment, life will take him away. Crime will take him away from you. So don't get close to this dog. And I would say things like this dog, the work dog, I clearly cared so much about him, but it was always tenuous for most of our years until we got into retirement where I could put him into one compartment, right? Being like, he's my buddy now. No one's taking him away from me. He's mine. Like he's a part of the family. But before that, I was like, I don't know if that's just a stress or a strain. I don't know if you resonate with that or seen that in other handlers.
Oh, yeah. No, 100%. You have these dogs and there's always and I've seen it happen. I've seen it where handlers have messed up and done things that unfortunately they can't come back from, and, the dog has to be taken away, or, they love the dog, but there's a workability issue and it's just not jiving with the dog, and the dog has to be taken away, and then sometimes in that position as the commander, you have to make those decisions, and they're really tough, and it's the hardest thing to do. And what's made it easier is having those relationships with the handlers to that they knew it wasn't anything personal, but that's not something you never set out to do. But I remember with my first dog, especially working, a patrol dog, is that when I struggled in certain areas like tracking and stuff like that, instead of trying to, we talk about regrets, instead of trying to address the issue, I would try to overcompensate in other areas instead of addressing my weaknesses. And, that's something I learned early on. And, Bernie, he called me out on it. I remember I put in for sergeant, early on, and he sat me in the office and said, you're a great officer, you're doing a lot of great things, but he said, right now you're not a good enough dog handler to be sergeant. And he said, how can you lead others as a sergeant if you're not, you know, fulfilling what you need to do as a handler? And it stung. And at the time, it pissed me off a little bit, but he was right. It took me going home and reflecting on that and then going back and working on those issues. And we ended up, we were never the greatest at tracking, but we got a lot better. And that's what it was all about. But it took that brutal honesty to reflect and make me see it. But yeah, I mean, I regret that a lot early on, that, I tried to overcompensate in other areas when I had weaknesses because, I didn't want to expose any weaknesses that I had. And I think that, Rex and I were a great team, but I think we could have been better. And, so there's definitely some things that I would have done differently. But the great thing is anytime I've made a mistake and I've tried to turn that into positive, and I've tried to build upon that with the other dogs that I've worked to not make those same mistakes. So, I try to make something positive out of it when those things do happen.
Yeah, which is why it's so key, and I love that you really share that notion, like, pay it forward, right? Mentorship, now you're commander, and you have that opportunity, right? Like, because what's that saying about, like, experience is the wisdom that we get after the point we needed it kinda thing, right? Like, yeah, if I would have done my career, K9 career differently, man, so many things I would have changed right from the start. And that's not focused on fear and risk, right? But when you get that official writing after a bad deployment and it says all the implications of potential discipline up to include, losing your dog in your assignment, you're like, oh man, like that it's almost like human nature to tighten up and be afraid and lose that extreme amounts of confidence in not just your ability but how you're going to proceed. Yeah, and so I think that that's one thing that is like a personal mantra, and if anyone gets that from the show either overtly or subtly, is like you got to identify the fear so you can keep it in check, right? Fear can be helpful and healthy, but yeah, we don't want it to like dictate our actions or inactions.
And it could become a vicious cycle, yeah, for sure, because I know, like, I had that same fear you talked about, Eric, is like when I was struggling, it's like, "Oh my gosh, am I gonna lose my dog? Are they gonna take my dog away?" And you kinda still even though even when you're successful, that's always still in the back of your mind, like you said, until that dog is retired to you and you're like, "Okay, he's mine now. I don't have to worry about that anymore." But I think we as handlers, that's something that we all deal with and think about.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's tricky, right? Like I even appreciate how man, like this is a total archetype, but I heard about it before I went to K9 conferences and I saw it, but every handler is just like this alpha that's like my team, me and my partner or my dog's the biggest, baddest, whatever, the best tracker, best biter, best whatever. I never felt that way because honestly, like we at every moment in our career we had a lot of work to do and we were not the most I'll say we weren't the most consistent, but I wouldn't trade him or the experience with him for any other dog or any other circumstance because in my hindsight, like everything that needed to work out when the stuff got really bad to include like our our shooting and, almost meeting arm makers that day, like everything worked out in my estimation the way it needed to. But not without struggle, not without heartache, not without headache and all that.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, and that's all part of the process and journey with these dogs, and like you said, I wouldn't trade any of it, everything, all the struggles that I've went through and, for anything. They've all taught me a lesson and, I've gotten better through all of it with each one of these dogs, so it's been a process for sure.
Yeah. Man, okay, so we're gonna get to this part's gonna be uncomfortable for those that are dog lovers. So K9 Tambo, he endured some extreme medical issues and was, I mean, right on the brink, life and death. And I'll share this with you. You know, I I don't know how overtly I've talked about it. I think I've given the play by play, but I'll kind of introduce it this way, which is like I was looking at one of the other episodes you appeared on, and I was like, I forget exactly where I was at. I was kind of like trying to come up with like things I want to hit on in this episode because there's so many things. Like I just wanted to learn, share your attitude, your positive outlook, but then also talk about canine stuff. And I knew a bit of Tambo's story, but I didn't know the specifics. And the first time I learned the specifics was actually reading it because I was in a place where like I wasn't going to be able to listen to a podcast, didn't have earbuds, but I was just reading like the show notes or like the transcript, and it hit me hard because what Tambo went through is exactly what that was the end of Cato. And we joked, my wife and I and colleagues.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, like it and what our parallels, man, are kind of crazy.
Wow,
Like you and me. Yeah.
man, I didn't know that. Yeah, that's crazy.
And so, like, we joked, that he had 9 lives, right? He got stabbed, we were in a shooting, we almost got blown up, he in training, we were clearing this warehouse, and we didn't do a good job checking it, this abandoned warehouse where he was doing this area search, and he basically, like, ran right off of this, like, total pit. I'm laughing now because he was totally okay. This pit and, like, fell, like, 10, 12 feet down in the rubble and, like, in the dark, and we are like, run over us flashlights, we're like, "Holy shit, like, how do we miss this?" Because he was just incensed and he just sprinted off like Wile E. Coyote. And then you look down, he's totally fine. He's just panting like, "The hell was that, Dad?" And then you crawl down and pull him back up by the harness, and he's totally fine. Um, so other things like there's train tracks that run through our city, like close calls with cars. The whole Jesus take the wheel, like let go of the lead because we're about to sprint across the street and this car comes and you let go of the lead rather than both getting hit and then he makes it across and you wait on the other like just hairy stuff. But we counted one time and I was like, yeah, I think he had 8 pretty, significant things and that was number 9. But yeah, man, like my wife was at home, I was at work, I'd retired him, I'd promoted sergeant, and she calls me, but she basically fortunately saw him seizing, like going through seizure in the backyard. And so what had happened was just like Tambo, his spleen ruptured. He had a tumor and he was bleeding out. And a different turn of events. And again, I'm so grateful for our time and for his presence, his spirit. But yeah, I'm also very grateful I was able to get home in time and take him in, spend his last moments with him. Um, and man, like you talk about armor and compartmentalization, and I just want to share this with you in this moment. I know it's being recorded, but like so many times I felt like when you put on the vest and the uniform, you're kind of in work mode and you're kind of like a superhero, right? Like you can do these things that, normal Chris or normal Eric cannot do. And some of that's logistical. Like I don't have all these tools and I'm not going to do that because it's just ridiculous. I have a radio, I've got backup, but taking him into his normal vet that they knew me, they knew he was a K9, and I just like could not hold it together. I'd never, not even close, had been so emotional, even cop funerals. I could not hold it together, and it was okay. I didn't care, but and they just showed so much empathy. I'm so fortunate to have those moments with him, and comfort him through that. But I share that, and hopefully, yeah, man. But talk about adversity and talk about overcoming it, and man, and I'll just give this sneak peek, guys. Like, if you're not familiar with Chris and Tambo's page, Tambo did not meet the same end, and so I'll leave it there and have you take over, Chris, for this pretty amazing story of like triumph there.
Yeah, and I'll set up a little bit earlier than that. After he retired, his first setback was he had I talked about in another interview. In retirement, he had this battle with the squirrel in the yard. So he used to chase this squirrel, and this squirrel would torment the hell out of him. And of course, one day he decided to, he thought he was 5 years old again and leaped off the top step, and I could see him pull up lame, and he ended up having a double ACL tear. So we got him in, in for surgery. But I had met Jason Johnson, the founder of Project K9 Hero, a couple years earlier, and Jason had helped out a couple other dogs in our unit. So Jason got Tambo right into the program and funded his TPLO surgery, which was 7,500 for the first leg, and we ended up not having to do the other leg because it ended up being stable enough. So I was the type that wanted to give back, and I kind of Tambo kind of became an ambassador for Project K9 Hero from there. And we had just we were kind of riding a high because we had just did the Philadelphia Phillies. We got honored on Tambo's 11th birthday, and it was a great moment. My son was there, and we were getting a lot of opportunities to still do things in retirement. So life was good, and fast forward to July, it was kind of a normal day. I got up for work. Tambo expects his breakfast at 5 a.m. So I came down. I fed him. He still, to this day, tries to go to work with me. So he tried to leave work with me that day. So he was just happy, enjoy himself. And it's weird, Eric. I got to work and I was having all these weird feelings. I never get palpitations, and I was having these horrible palpitations. I was kind of dizzy, nauseous, and I thought it would subside, and it was like 10 o'clock, and it was still going on. And I told my boss I need to go home. I'm just not feeling right. And my plan was to go home and just lay down. And I pulled up and I walked in, and the first thing every time I walk in the door, Tambo runs to greet me. Well, this day he wasn't there, and I knew that was something was wrong. And I quickly went through the rooms, couldn't find him, and then when I turned the corner, I saw him in the dining room, and he was sprawled out. And I ran up to him. His stomach was kind of distended, and then I looked at his gums. His gums were pale, which was indicative of blood loss. I didn't know what was wrong, but I knew we were in a life or death situation. So he could barely stand on his feet. So I picked him up. I carried him out. I rushed him to the emergency vet, which was about 20 minutes from the house, which felt like an hour because I was like, man, I said, please let me be able to get to the vet in time. So I got there. they took him back, and they came back out, shortly after that. And same thing as you had said. They said he had a mass, rupture on his spleen, and he's in the process of bleeding out. And he doesn't have much time left. And they said, oh, by the way, his spleen is littered in masses, which we're 99% sure is cancer. And I said, well, what are my options? And they said the options are that we can get him comfortable, and you can let him go, or we can try to do surgery, which would be removing the spleen, giving him a blood transfusion. But oh, by the way, we think there's cancer masses on the liver as well. So um, this doesn't bode well for him. And they kind of gave him slim chances, even if we went through the surgery. So I took a minute, and I went back and saw him. And for the first time in my life, this stoic dog, I saw fear in his eyes. And that really hit me. And then the next thing I saw is, his eyes were telling me he wasn't ready to go. I've become so bonded with this dog, with our parallels, and he was telling me, "Dad, I'm not ready. Don't let me go." And the first thing I wanted to do was get really emotional, and I started to, but then I realized for 7 years, this dog has been my security blanket. He's been there for me through all of my hard times. Now I need to be strong for him. And I looked at the vet, and I said, I want to go through with the surgery. I said, I just need to make a quick phone call. So I called Jason from Project K9 Hero. I told him what was going on, and Eric, this is what he said to me. He goes, bro, what do you want to do? And I said, Jay, he's not ready, man. His eyes are telling me he's not ready. I said, he's going to get through this. And this is all Jay said. Jay said, Chris, we got your back 100%. We'll cover it. And the quote they gave me was between nine and $12,000, to get all this situated. So they did the surgery. They said it'd be 50-50 if he'd make it through it. And they called me up and said he made it through the surgery, and then it was the waiting game whether he was going to live through the night. But then they called me the next morning and said he was up and eating breakfast, like the fighter that he was. And but the crazy part was from there, Eric, is that, oh, by the way, he's probably only got a couple weeks to live now. Based if it's the cancer that we think it is, which is hemangiosarcoma, which is they call the silent killer in dogs. So sure enough, biopsy came back. 4 days later, they confirmed that it was hemangiosarcoma. Told me the same thing, that he's probably got a couple weeks to live, if that. It's a very aggressive cancer. Um, so first thing I did is I found an oncology team, which is right outside of Philadelphia, which is about an hour and 20 minutes from the house. I took him in there, and they suspected that the cancer was on the liver. And the first thing she said to me, she said, "Look, if the cancer is on the liver, there's not much we can do at this point, and chemotherapy isn't going to do anything. But we're going to take him down back. We're going to do another ultrasound, and we'll kind of come back and let you know where we're at." And she came back in, and I'm pretty big on picking up with energy, and it was very positive. She said, "Look, what they thought was cancer on the liver was just kind of like age related cyst, and that's not cancer related. So he's a candidate for chemotherapy, and we can start today." And then she gave me a quote of $700 a session. Again, it was just a quick phone call to Jason with Project K9 here. He said, we got your back 100%. And man, we started chemo that day, and we did chemo every 2 weeks for 5 weeks, and he powered through it, like the champion that he is. And it was funny, as we were progressing, the oncologist always wanted to kind of give me an expiration date for Tambo, how much time he had left. And finally, I stopped her, and I said, no disrespect. I said, we don't believe in expiration dates. I said, I believe that the mind, body, and spirit is what keeps us going. And then as we progress through this journey, man, she doesn't even bring it up anymore. He's continued to power through this. I'm proud to say that that was when this all started. That was July of 2025, and he's still going strong right now, man. He just hit his 12th birthday a couple weeks ago. So we've we've kind of defied the odds, and beating the probability of this cancer, which is crazy.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. That's like props to you and props to Jason and the foundation and Tambo for fighting, right? And man, like we talk about other themes here on the show, which is like purpose in life and just, people sharing their own outlook. And I think like the more and more, or I suppose like the older I get, I think things work out the way they need to. And no one can make a better choice than the handler, than the family, and for you to recognize in that moment as you saw it and you saw like his eyes and you're like, man, like this isn't it. And this is not how he's going to go out. And I know that there's going to be a lot of opinions with that. Similarly with my situation, I'm sure there's a lot of opinions with that when I was like looking at him and I was like, man, this is it, and I'm glad I can spend my time with him. The prognosis was very similar. It was eerie reading and then listening to, you describe that. But I think things work out how they need to, and like I I think that there's so much good in example and storytelling and sharing and getting inspired from either example and both examples. I think it's very serendipitous to meet you in this way, through Dom Thielemann to be like, even when I just heard you're a cool dude that has a really cool outlook and K9 insights and stories to share, I was like, yeah, awesome. And then I hear more and more about you, and I'm like, man, there's a reason why I'm supposed to meet this dude. And even, just kind of reflect differently and, reflect back. And like I said, memory lane, like, kicking up some dust and, in this positive way. Um, just thinking about the K9 years and what Cato was able to offer me and the community he served.
It's funny how things work, right? Like, when I first started documenting his journey on Instagram, it was kinda to peel the curtain back on what these retired working dogs go through in retirement and that their life doesn't end after retirement. But as I started documenting the cancer, journey, something else started happening. I started it not only was resonating with handlers, but it was resonating with people that were battling cancer themselves. And that was the cool part is that, they'd reach out to me and said, "Hey, my dad is fighting the terminal cancer. He's still going through chemo. He wanted to quit, but he sees Tambo fighting and he wants to continue to fight." And I think, Eric, I think the big things that people resonated is they saw the simplicity of how he lived his life. Like, he doesn't know he has cancer, but he gets up every day, he hurts, he doesn't feel well, but he chooses happiness, right? And he finds the happiness in the simplest of things, and, he continues to move forward regardless of the odds. And, the deeper part, and this is what kind of inspired me to, we'll talk about the children's book, to write it, is when, parents started reaching out saying that, their kid was going through cancer and it wasn't a good prognosis, but they enjoyed seeing Tambo's post, and it gave them light in a dark time. And that really hit me hard from a lot of aspects of just knowing some of the stuff that I felt as a young kid, and then being a father, and knowing that, thinking about these kids that are struggling now with illnesses, or feeling unseen and stuff like that. So that was really, really deep, and it started resonating just with a lot of people in general that are going through hard things in life, and that to not give up. So I feel like it was just kind of all running parallel and meant to be how this is all kind of played out.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
And one of the yeah, one I was gonna say, one of the cool things is that, I've really leaned into this Rocky mantra, right? Like, I always
I
said,
was
like,
just thinking Rocky, man, like when you're saying like he just keeps fighting. Yeah.
yeah. Well, listen to this story. I always talked about being the underdog and the Rocky mantra growing up. So, one of the skits I did for, when he went to chemo, is I always tried to, put some positivity on it. I did a John Cena one where we had John Cena shirts on, and then I did a Rocky one where I had a costume from Amazon where he had boxing gloves and he came out to "There's No Easy Way Out," and I had my mom, who was a two-time cancer survivor, open the door, and he came out in his boxing outfit. And the chemo we were getting was right outside of Philly, where Rocky was born. So I get a call from the Philadelphia Eagles, and they heard about Tambo's story, and they said, "Well, how would you like to be honored on Sunday Night Football?" And I said, "Man, that would be absolutely amazing." So they invited us and Project K9 Hero to come out. November 16th of last year on Sunday Night Football against the Lions, and they brought us out in the first quarter. And they talked about Tambo's service, and then they talked about he's in the fight of his life right now, given 2 weeks to live. And man, we got a standing ovation from 70,000 people, and I was like, man, that was a full circle moment. Like two people that life had kind of given up on, and here we are on this national stage and getting this ovation. It was kind of surreal and a full circle moment of how everything has been running parallel with each other, and it was just a really cool moment. And then the morning of that, myself and Jason and the Project K9 Hero team, we took Tambo and ran the Rocky Stairs, which was really cool. And we got pictures with the statue and everything. So it's just a really cool and symbolic trip, and how it's all kind of ran parallel with everything.
Yeah, I saw that post on the Rocky Steps, and I've run up those steps, and I've enjoyed that nostalgic kind of like, oh yeah, Rocky Steps. But yeah, it's like I think that man, one of the things if there's a standing theme or a recurring theme here on the show, I'm like, man, if you want to be happy, if you want to be purposeful, if you want to be uplifted, and you choose that, right? And there's ways to find the good and like create the good, and to be inspired by that story and see like the parallels in yourself, and then for other people, for kids to resonate, for cancer, those battling cancer or some other, tribulations, like it's there if you so choose. And it's, someone could say it's an old dog that's, battling cancer, okay, but then other people would be like, man, that was everything, because I know every dog lover will understand, but we can learn so much from dogs because they don't complain. They're just happy to be there. They don't require much, just some pets, a treat, a walk, like. But imagine if we all got like a hug, some good food, and a walk in nature. Like, how much more grounded would we be if we just took those moments for ourselves and nudged each other to step away from the screen, or get off the social sometimes. So, and it's the simple stuff, right?
Absolutely, and just the simple things now of he enjoys, getting his breakfast, going for a car ride, and going to get a bath. And now started him on these pup cups at Starbucks, and it's like, geez, now he
Oh
like
man,
he demands them every time we go
you're a
out for a
softy.
ride.
You're a softy. Yeah,
I know. I'm like, what has
yeah,
happened to this dog? Like, you're putting outfits on him, and he's eating pup cups. I'm like, man.
yeah. Hey, he's
So
earned it. He's fought it.
that's
So
right. That's right. He's earned it, man, and he's happy, and he's doing great. We're still pushing forward. We got the children's book, which has been doing really good, and then
yeah, where
y-
do people find that?
yeah. So
Let's just plug that.
you can find it on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, or Ingram Spark. And the premises of the book, it's called K9 Tambo, and again, it's in a way that following the story of Tambo. Tambo gets sick in the book, but for a way that a child can understand, and gets medicine to get better. But along the way, he's inspiring children that are going through hard times to not give up and to not be scared when they're facing tough things in life. And then in the back, I put a resource guide for parents and teachers to kind of go over with their kids of what they learned from the book. And I was inspired just by the kids that are battling a lot of stuff right now, myself, and then my son. And I'm in the process of donating a bunch of copies to the Children's Cancer Hospital to kind of to give back. It's not really a money making thing for me. It's a way to kind of give back to others, and hopefully it can help them a little bit.
I love it, man. Well, I appreciate so much your time sharing, not just about Tambo, but about you and your outlook. What do you want to leave the listeners with? I mean, we've covered a lot of ground and a lot of positive themes, but is there anything else as you find yourself focusing on as you continue through this thing called life?
Is that you have to keep evolving and keep pushing forward regardless of where you get in life. But the biggest thing, Eric, that I've learned to do is that you need to stop and revel in your own success and accomplishments. Sometimes my whole life I've accomplished things, but it's like I'm on to the next thing right after that, because I was constantly trying to prove things to myself and prove that I'm worthy and I'm good enough. And sometimes you need to look at your accomplishments and take some time to enjoy them and look how far you've come, right? And I think that's really important. It's something that I continue to work on. And the other thing, what I'll leave with people is that, when you feel like you've hit that rock bottom, that bottom point when you can't come back from, that's not where your story ends. That's where it starts, right? That's where the comeback starts, and that's a beautiful thing. So when you get to that point, it's not the end. It's actually the beginning,
Mhm.
and you control what happens from there. And I just want people to realize that it's never over until it's over.
Yeah. Man, I wanna echo both prongs that I heard. One is, like, the chasing of validation, and you identified it, and I feel that in myself, but it took me a while to get there. So I think for those that are grinders, those are workaholics, those that are always juggling all these hats, and it's not bad, it's well intended. You're like, "Hey, I wanna be helpful. I wanna do more. I wanna be out there." Take those moments, and sometimes it takes a friend, and I can remember specifically, it was a solid dude, Alex, that was like, "Hey, man, you ever just stop and think about, like, all the cool stuff you've been doing?" And I was like, "No." But then it forced me to be like, "Yeah, like, I got to meet a lot of cool people, and I am doing a lot, and I am pretty proud of that." And I think that's good to say that and recognize that. Little kid Chris, little kid Eric, if they were looking forward to say, "Hey, this is your life one day," would they have even believed it? And I don't think little kid Eric would have. So,
Right.
yeah, and then this yeah,
100%. And
yeah.
you gotta just stop and smell the road. And I look at that with my son too. It's like, man, one of these days he's not going to be yelling "Daddy, Daddy" anymore, and you need to. And everyone says you need to enjoy that while it lasts, because one day they're going to be independent, and you got to be present in the moment and not worry about the other things and focus on the things in life that matter. And that's one of the things that Tambo's really kind of taught me.
Yeah, I love that. These are the good old days, my friend.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And one of the other things, Eric, yeah, I'll plug is, I just got sponsored for, a publishing deal for a book, the adult memoir that will be out in September. And it's it'll be the full kind of story of what we talked about today, but more in detail with everything about my upbringing, Bernie, and everything Tambo and I went through in our career, his cancer, and then my dad. And that will be out in September. So I'm excited to release that out into the world and share that story with everyone as well.
Awesome. Well, I'll be looking forward. Thank you so much for connecting, man, and we'll chat sometime soon, I'm sure.
Sounds good. Thank you so much for having me on. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for tuning into another episode of Blue Grit Radio. As always, support this community by subscribing, giving us a 5-star review, and following, liking, and sharing posts on Blue Grit Wellness on Instagram. You can reach me there or email me at bluegritwellness@gmail.com. Be well and stay gritty.